Hello, listeners. At the risk of sounding trite, I wade into the "what is a woman" controversy. In conservative circles, this issue is being done to death. Not that left-wing liberals see it that way. They just go on their merry way, unperturbed, undisturbed. But it is a milestone moment in the ideological war of our times, that's for sure. I gave up on America when the US Army appointed its first, quote-unquote, openly lesbian general. A woman is bad enough, but say no more. I gave up on the human race generally when a significant proportion of the Australian population voted in favour of so-called same-sex so-called marriage. Popular wisdom said that the affirmative vote was something like two-thirds of the population. It was in fact 1% less than half of all Australians eligible to vote. So it was actually 49%. But that comes as cold comfort to me, given that even a significant number of people in a given population could find it within themselves to entertain this preposterous notion that two men could get married to each other. I said at the time, I'm not ashamed to be an Australian. I'm ashamed to be a human being. Now, moral degeneracy is matched by intellectual degeneracy as well. But what is a woman is another quantum leap in leftist idiocy. And it is so because it's the fulfillment of something that I thought about some time ago, that what left-wing ideologues have inflicted on Western culture over the decades since the 1960s is something that I believe reaches a point where not even they can control it. Of course, the transgenderism movement is the point at which classic left-wing new left ideology now starts to eat its own children, just as the French Revolution did. Transgenderism comes from the same people and the same mindset that leftists have been inflicting on us over the last few decades. So the same forces that demand that women are equal to men now demand that men who think they're a woman trapped in a man's body must be considered equal to women. Now you get pathetic left-wing advocates, the likes of Germaine Greer, J.K. Rowling and John Cleese, squealing about being bullied by leftist ideologues who are more ideologically pure than they are, in almost exactly the same mindset as they themselves inflicted on Western culture decades ago. So women are now equal to men in sport, but now the transgenderists insist that men can compete against women and predictably win all the contests, thus completely negativing all the quote-unquote advances of women in sport and in other fields of human endeavour, where they must inevitably give way to the greater strengths and abilities of men. Feminism is now cancelled by the return of men to the arena in the form of men who claim that they're actually women, and there's not a thing that the old-style leftist brigade can do about it. So even if the propagators of the idiotic social justice crusade that has been inflicted on us over the last few decades wanted to roll it back, they would be, and are now demonstrably seen to be, unable to do so. I have in the past methodically dealt with the clown show of the black woman nomination for the US Supreme Court who could not or would not define what is a woman, and I won't belabor that in this video, but I have been kicking around in my head the idea of what could this woman really have said that would have amounted to at least the appearance of a reasonably coherent rendition of what she actually is supposed to believe about this subject. I've already mentioned the contradictions inherent in her answer, which, apart from anything else, seem to disqualify her from a position of authority on the Supreme Court, and her mental agility to deal with complex questions of law, thinking on her feet, so to speak. And I kicked around notions of, well, a woman has XX chromosomes, but then there's men who have the spirit of a woman inside them. Some halfway coherent response, but it all inevitably leads to an intellectual dead end where you can have a person asserting pretty much anything about themselves in their great absolute freedom that the left has bequeathed to us, such as, I can't be convicted of this murder because I identify as being 5 years old. Aha, but we have your birth certificate, which shows that you are 35 years old. Yes, but I just said I identified as being 5 years old. I didn't say I was 5 years old. And who is going to stand in the way of that personal expression of freedom? Game, set, and match. And I don't know just how clever this woman appointee was, or this token black woman appointee was, but it will, in the end, lead to a hopeless contradiction, an intellectual dead end, blind alley of reasoning. And to recall my previous point about how left-wingers have opened Pandora's box on something which not even they can control, and it only serves to reinforce a point that I have argued for a long time, that left-wing ideology about creating a better world is nothing more than a never-ending quest for ideological purity. They do not have any coherent goals that could ever be realised in a society. It's hard to imagine what kind of society you would have if all of the goals of left-wing crusades were achieved. What sort of world would we live in? Not even they would have an answer to that. But the real point is that they are only concerned to be political activists. It is just the journey. It is never the destination. This is something the left can't control. It's also something conservatives can't coherently fight against, which is like shadow boxing or punching a marshmallow. It's just the journey, not the goal. It's your identity as a person with a political activist mentality, not the person who has achieved some particular concrete result. If you asked me to build a bridge, I would get all the money and materials together, and 6 months later I'd say, there's your bridge. But left-wingers don't have to ever do anything like that. All they've got to do is sit in a room and think ideologically pure thoughts. That's the whole goal of their existence, because they believe that the way we think about the world determines how the world is, which unfortunately for me is quite true, but unfortunately for them, the way people think and behave is not the same thing as how we theorise. And that's something that they either don't understand or refuse to recognise. And I might add that this is nothing less than the political philosophy of Maoism. That is the political philosophy that dominates the Western world. A Democrat candidate for the presidency back in 2020, part of a group of aspiring presidential candidates, goes before the national media. His election pitch is that he will legislate for publicly funded abortions for men who get pregnant. This is a man aspiring to become the leader of a nation of 300 plus million people and the leader of the free world, talking sublime nonsense. Even a few years ago, in our mad, morally and intellectually degenerate culture, they could have been calling for the men in white coats to drag this guy off the stage and into some mental home, although you can't call them that now, can you? It isn't what he says that matters. What matters is that he's going before the American people and saying, I'm a really progressive guy. I'm the kind of guy who is going to say things like this, even though what I'm saying has no concrete reality to it. It identifies who I am, the kind of person I am that is just like you and the kind of person you want to be. That has nothing to do with men getting pregnant. It's just a flag, a signpost. In a recent Matt Walsh video, he shows footage of a man appearing before Congress Just judging by this guy's appearance, I would say he was one of them, which actually seriously upped the ante. Now, this man's exact words before a congressional hearing, not some alternative lifestyle workshop, not in some hippie commune somewhere up on the north coast. He says men can have pregnancies, especially trans men. Up until this point, we all know what this language means, that someone who says they're a man but has XX chromosomes and is biologically a woman can get pregnant, but we're just playing word games. No one in their right mind asserts that an actual biological man can get pregnant. But that's not what this man says before a congressional hearing televised for the entire population of the United States in the area of serious public discourse. This man says that a biological man can get pregnant. He might just as well be saying that there are fairies at the bottom of the garden, that the world is flat. There are a lot of YouTube videos where people say the earth is flat, but what they do is attempt to give some halfway scientific basis for what it is they're asserting. However crackpot it may be, even that makes more sense than this. These people are at least attempting to put forward a rational argument, but to assert that biological men can get pregnant would be anybody's definition of insanity. This is how far we've sunk. And don't get me started on the founding fathers spinning in their graves. So when we look at this whole scenario of what is called identity politics is two things that are related and overlap in some ways. The first part of identity politics is that you promote the cause of some politically identifiable group, such as blacks or women or homosexuals. This is the classic Marxist routine or shtick about how one group of evil people oppress another group of totally innocent people all the time. A very simple moral calculation of good guys versus bad guys, men in black hats versus men in white hats. A very easy way, some might say intellectually lazy way, to view reality. So you have the identification of victim groups, and you have another class of people who possess a political activist mentality which constantly regurgitates these scenarios of oppression. So now it becomes important to identify yourself as this kind of person, as opposed to people who aren't like you are as a socially conscious person, a social justice crusader. So the men who profess that men can get pregnant, it doesn't matter actually what they are saying. The concrete truth of what they're saying doesn't matter. It's just that they are your kind of person, your kind of left-wing activist. And if you elect me to office, I'm the kind of person you can rely upon to say these kind of things that will reinforce my and your identity as a particular kind of person, where abject nonsense makes a certain amount of sense. And just a foray into terminology. Let's get some of our terminology straight here. In the glory days of the old New Left, back in the protest era, the personal is political. That's just what I said. All of these evil people, fill in the blank, oppress all of these innocent people, fill in the blank, all the time. A simplistic moral scenario, a modern morality play. This used to be called ideologically sound reasoning, and its adherents were termed politically aware. In the more modern era, ideological soundness became political correctness, and politically aware became woke, as in has woken up to the truth. You get the Me Too movement these days, which portrays a scenario of all evil men oppress all innocent women all the time. So a man accused by some woman of sexual assault is guilty until proven innocent, except that once the charge is made, the member of this group of people who oppress women all the time are guilty, end of story, and nobody bothers to investigate whether the man could be innocent as charged. Marxist class warfare, this type of evil person oppressing this kind of totally innocent person all the time, and I belong to a morally and intellectually superior class of people possessing a permanent mentality of political activism, constantly in search of issues that I can apply that activist mentality to. People, conservatives, throw up their hands and say, where will all this madness end? Well, it's not going to end. These activists are just going to keep on consolidating their self-image as people possessing a political activist mentality. The ideology gets purer and purer, and the insanity just gets more insane. This view of things is counterpointed with what real conservatism is compared to what the left slanderously says it is by reference to their own august, inflated view of themselves. And that's another subject, because you've got to unpick true conservatism compared to the febrile ideological fantasy that is left-wing and what I still would refer to as new left politics, which is not politics, it's just a pseudo-religious personal experience of self-actualization. This is not politics, it's psychology. And a lot of people just don't get that. These are just wedge issues designed to wind people up in order to achieve that goal. Now, the ideological purity itself has outpaced the ability of its propagators to manage. And the point of what I'm saying is to observe how unable even the supporters of transgenderism are, or just left-wingers in general, to give a coherent answer to what is a woman, because all this stuff has gone beyond the ability of the human mind to put under intellectual control. And as I have frequently characterised it, Western culture is run by 3-year-old children, ruling over a population of 3-year-old children who have the intellectual competency and control of 3-year-old children, which is now, for all to see, nothing more than an infantile rant. And you will continue to observe this as you observe left progressivists trying to coherently articulate the inarticulatable or explain the inexplicable. And the human race remains just as hopelessly confused as it ever was.